Thanks so much for everyone for coming to my show, Post-Chrome. I got to give some thank yous and acknowledgments right before we get started. Big thank you to my committee, Jen, Charles, and Eli. You've all been instrumental to my time here at Purdue. The time has flown. Here I am 3 years later with a whole new set of tools, conceptually and formally. And I really can't thank you each enough for all the support you've given me. I'm going to jump into this talk and give you really just more about what this show is about. I'm not going to cover too much about my MFA journey. It's going to be more what Post-Chrome is and some of the ideas that I explore in it. I'm going to talk briefly about my conceptual ideas in the work, and then we'll talk about some of the specific series that you see in the show. My artworks are internal explorations of the post-industrial Midwestern psyche. So reveries or daydreams of self encompassed in the degraded influences of the past and the rusted landscape of the present. They function as mounds of visual rubble, so poetically stringing together masses of images and marks upon the surface. A flower picked by my mother in spring, a dusted work coat hanging from the banister, or dented beer cans from last night's smolder. These works are moments of self-reflection, questioning and confronting what it means to be of and from a region by and for the glories of yesterday, a glancing in the rearview mirror of inherited nostalgia for the region. Much of this work talks on translations and influences. So as influences are passed through people and time, they inevitably deform. The idea changed and distorted as the time it gets to us, thinking like a game of telephone. What you say is not what's heard. I grapple with these ongoing conflicts between ruined legacies of influence and my own understanding of self in the work. The ruins I'm exploring appear physically, such as the abandoned industrial factories and disused lots throughout the landscape, as well as internally. Internal ruins such as predispositions to alcoholism or outdated understandings of work, class, and value in the modern landscape. These sometimes disparate and self-contradicting planes attempt to fit the now with the then of the region and inherited cultures that form me and the people within it. I'm therefore creating a visual language of fragmented imagery which repeats and degrades through time. In this practice, I find myself covering the work in racing logos and cursive nameplates from yesterday's past automotive giants. Cadillac badges ripped from the steel bodies of yesterday's bumpers, looming over the work as this past glorified era overshadows my present psyche. This is a breather slide. Combining eras and auras, the works create separations between moments of thought, reflecting the chaos and calm simultaneously existent within self during reflection. Varying from quiet and tenderly rendered depictions to fast elements exploding into our world, the works reflect the varied state involved in introspective analysis, at times anxious and convoluted, others calm, clear, and contained. These elements vary in application and psyche. Realistic meditations of floating bolts, tires, folded license plates give a moment of calm, understanding, and acceptance, while fast and loose marks of scratching material and thick gobs of color swirl in desperate intangibility. The importance of these works is not in the elements themselves, but in the union of the elements upon the surface. The importance is in the mass and the mess of them. So, a little background on me, who I am, what this work has to do with me, and how I have a connection to the subject matter. I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a pretty famous industrial hub for furniture manufacturing. I was raised around manufacturing culture, automotive racing, and overall Rust Belt ephemera of the region. I spent much of my youth in pole barn garages with my father at automotive racetracks, working in factories making parts for the automotive industry in and around them, and skateboarding on abandoned concrete foundations of the recent 2008 recession. These experiences have stuck with me to this day and inform my understanding of the region, its small moments, and my sense of self within this place. So I'm going to break the talk up into about 3 parts. I'm going to talk about the prints first and talk about some of the images I'm using, how those differ from some of the painted works. The images that cover these works are an iconographic language of personal symbolism, using objects and scenes of my environment as stand-ins for experiences, mindsets, people, or places. Many of these marks are direct repetitions, a replicated silkscreen image seen across paper and panel, reusing matrices and substrates across the works themselves. These repeated images create a type of dialogue between the compositions, like mirrors of self or photographs of loved ones. A repeated element in the work that you'll see pretty often is the unassuming car tire. It's become a stand-in for figures in the work or people. A mortal thing that's made, used, worn down, and tossed into a pile of old, worn-out versions of itself. I've come to see these mounds of tires as a type of inherited history, piled up in the alleyways behind our homes, weighing on the landscape and psyche of the present as it settles into the moss and the mud. This transformation of object to figure also occurs many times using traffic cones, bricks, other mass-produced industrial objects. You can see in this piece here, the cones appear, which is a really large part of my practice throughout my time here at Purdue. Less in this show, but it's really made a big impact on me. Within the print-based work, I've come to work with layers as a way to converse with myself through time, a type of call and response between the artist and the reflections of the works that develop. Past layers are removed or erased through thick, opaque masses of silkscreen or built upon with soft lithographic impressions. These moments of what is shown and what is hidden highlights the past-present balancing act within the work. These prints even split at many points as I have a conversation with them, becoming multiple editions from one as I decide what the print needs and what I want to give it. Because the way I create these works, they become unnecessarily layered in compulsive cycles of push and pull, addition and subtraction. This building and destroying of images through layers and time connects with the landscapes and places I'm talking about. Their development and decline becoming cyclical in time. Once the mighty Packard plant of Hamtramck, now only a place of photographs, tagged drywall, and stripped copper on its way back to rubble. As a new way of working, this print was an exercise in a lack of restraint, and it set a precedent for how I follow my work moving forward. It was an attempt to find the breaking point of the materials and the imagery I was using. It includes 2 separately printed CMYK layers, because I didn't plan it terribly well, a bunch of gloss varnish that you can really hardly see. I think there's 3 layers of white. It landed somewhere between 17 and 21 layers in its final composition. I don't really know where it ended up, but it's somewhere in there. And it really was all done within about a week and a half, which made the paper buckle with the moisture and kind of destroyed it in the process. I was pretty frustrated with it, and I put it away in my flat file drawer, only to rediscover it a couple weeks later, where I found a new value in it. This lack of planning really causes an increase in the labor of printmaking. So typically prints are planned meticulously in order to print the minimum layers possible, because every additional layer you do is a significant chunk of time that you have to prep that layer as well as execute the printing of it. So to ensure you don't have to do that, most people will plan their layers out ahead of time. I am intentionally in this work not doing that as a way to converse with the works through time. It's become an intentional inefficiency in my practice, and it's the only way I really approach prints anymore. So I approach this work, which is actually the El Dorado piece in a really early stage, by layering ink over ink with mixtures of lithograph and silkscreen, hand-drawn and digital. This process is done mostly using opaque drawings, or the red, which is blocking light, on clear acetate, which is exposed upon a silkscreen or a photosensitive lithographic plate, and then it's printed upon the work. Here you can see I have the key layer sitting here to tell me where the colors should land. The red layer is the drawn piece, and the gray is the actual printing of that layer in silkscreen upon the work. The print progressed as follows, so a little behind the scenes on how this one was built up. And a lot of this is back and forth. I'm looking at the print as I put each layer down and deciding what it needs. At one point I increased the yellow because it just felt a little bit dull and the work needed a little bit more pop to it. It's a lot of give and take in these works, and I don't always know where they're going to end. I really never know where they're going to end when I start them. Or I think I know, and I end up being proved wrong. For the key layer, I used a lithographic limestone. The images on the surface of these historic rocks are over 100 years old. For instance, you can see this is the back of one of the stones in our studio. The Indianapolis Board of Trade insignia is still on the back of it. You could still revive and print these today. Many of the images and almost all of the stones come from past industrial use, in this case, Indianapolis, where they were used in the printing industry. I'm reviving these and putting them into my work today. On the other side of this, I'm using silkscreen, which is a modern practice that's used. I'm sure many of you are wearing silkscreened objects today, and it's still used as a very popular practice of industrial manufacturing. This past-present play between rocks that are hundreds of years old and images hundreds of years old upon them, and the silkscreen process, which is fairly recent and still used today, talks about this past and present play within the work. Here is a video of me printing the stone. It's in, what I'm actually doing is I'm putting water upon the surface and I'm rolling upon it with a greasy oil. You draw the image with a greasy crayon, so oil sticks to oil, water repels, and the porous surface of the limestone opens up to absorb the water and repel. So you repeat exactly what was drawn. This entire process requires no electricity at all hand done, hand grained, and hand printed. Just a little nitric acid to help you along the way. And here I am adding the final layer for this print. And here is the final composition. After finishing, I decided the work needed something more, something to break it up and imply more breaking of time. I decided on adding the logo from a Cadillac Eldorado that I saw a few months prior at the Gilmore Car Museum in Michigan. Here I planned out the layers. I've hand-drawn every layer of this film. It's a 5-layer silkscreen print that goes right over top of the composition in completely opaque ink. And here is myself silkscreening that final layer upon the work. So you can see a much more modern process. We're using a vacuum table, which obviously requires power. We expose the screens using a UV-powered unit. So it's a very modern process that I'm using in an artistic way as opposed to lithography, which is a very historic process. And here I am proofing it. This is probably a good time to also talk about the way I'm comparing it to the previous edition, as you would in a manufacturing setting, trying to keep the quality exactly the same throughout the work. And here's the final composition in the center of the wall back there. I want to talk really briefly on some of my historical and contemporary influences that I'm having dialogues with. So those of the post-abstract expressionist movement, including Robert Rauschenberg, as well as James Rosenquist from the same era, heavily influenced my work in style and form. The use of pop culture images and advertisements imply a call to the consumerist culture and a life saturated in images. When continuing a conversation with some of the same imagery and marks in my work, I'm creating a funhouse mirror of this time they're referencing, interpreting something interpreted by someone before me, something lost or gained in this translation. These artists praise their era, American exceptionalism and the peak industrial might of the post-World War II world. If their work is a glorification of the American dream, my work is an obituary for it. In the contemporary artistic landscape, I find myself having ongoing conversations with artists such as Monica Baer, Julia Wachel, Wendy White, Jackson Taylor, Aaron Coleman, and Tom Christensen. Now, getting into the next body of work that I've started to refer to as splits. There's actually 2 of them in this show, but there are 3 in total. I decided on not showing the third for space limitations. These works are separated by a long, deep panel which juts out into space. Pillars pushing the multiple realms of reflection apart, forcing the viewer to grapple with their separations, connections, and differences. These dividers function as physical separations of ways of thinking or moments of thought. Within Out of the Bar Stool, the one in the corner there, we see the left a manic collage of silkscreen images and persistent hands telling you to look or go or sit and drink a while. The left side is a manic grasping for self within these environments and a grappling with devices that come with them. The right panel counters with a cool blue cloud and a simplified beer logo, in this case Stroh's, a traditional beer from Detroit. From a rushing freeway of brightly lit signage or blurred faces over a local bar stool to a quiet moment looking out my Detroit window during winter mornings amid the 2020 pandemic. Of the elements in the work, the cartoon hands and birds continue to function as a motif of self and struggle. The bird, a caricature of my creation, and this is the only of the 3 pieces that is not included in the show, and the hands, an extension of it, have become a childish approach to grappling with internal struggles of predispositions within my experience. This character has become an avatar of containment within these cyclical reflections within the region, unable to escape his surroundings, bogged down within the patterns of self-sabotage and external limitations. The cartoon hands gesture in unison, pushing the viewer across the work towards areas of destruction or harm. How do we understand these hands? Do we trust them? I've realized depicting these elements is a type of shadowboxing with myself, between compulsive actions of the day and slow escapes of the night. Bright aggressive colors, shining enamel, and the pop of a bottle of gin to wash it all down. These themes are also explored in Half Pint Patina, referencing dated advertisements of Miller High Life, a smashed exit sign at the Wabash Levee, and flaming tires falling in unison. The pillar or split plane here is degraded, sanded, painted over, and sanded again, a type of patina finish that I've created. A show of layers through each other like a sun bleach hood off a '66 Mustang behind the LKQ car lot. Moving on to the enamels, the big ones and the most recent. The final series here is one that arose just over the past year, and they're created on panels of wood using enamel as a type of unifying or background space within them. Beginning after I was gifted a stack of unused panels that were covered in a safety yellow, these works become important due to the material language that the enamel implies, as well as the enormity of their presence in many cases. This enamel, or tractor paint in my case, is used to cover engines, machinery, factory floors, and other rugged industrial materials and equipment. Highly toxic to poor and everlasting, this material speaks to the legacy of the region and my current understanding of self within it. I began with these by using the bright yellow surface that came with them, creating small moments of reflection upon the larger mass of color. And after a few, what I've seen as failed attempts, it became obvious that the yellow was too active of a surface to work on. Many of these panels have become used 2 or 3 times. For instance, the work that you're seeing here is actually that large bluey composition in the center. I just poured enamel right over top of it, sealing in an additional layer and impression upon the work itself. If you look closely, you can even see on the edges some of that color will show through. And here is a painting that I've poured. In response to this yellow, highly active surface, I began to pour, slash, spatter, and rub enamel to create a neutral yet active background for these elements to exist within. This created a unified space across the substrates. What we see within the works are cropped windows into a shared space throughout the exhibition and throughout the compositions. The use of appropriated ephemera of the past creates a direct conversation with the nostalgia of the region I'm referencing and the echo of an era that predates my own. In exploring these ideas, I find it inevitable that the automotive-based imagery of the past collides with that of the present world that I'm living in now and have experienced. There's a play of nostalgia in the work, but one more specifically inherited than personally known, as I'm referencing something I never lived or knew. George Steinmetz, in his work, Colonial Melancholy and Fordist Nostalgia, talks on ruins in the post-industrial Midwest and our connections to them. He describes a Fordist nostalgia that people of Michigan and mainly people of Detroit have for the shuttered factories of the region, a yearning for the prosperous times that the structures represent, as opposed to a connection to the structures themselves. These are not the Colosseums of Rome, but tombstones of Packard and Pontiac. I'm having an active dialogue with this type of nostalgia and its prevalence among the experience in and around the Rust Belt, presenting ideas of a past I never knew mixed with the results I know all too well. This work here, you can see some of it, was the first work where I directly referenced nameplates from classic American automobile cars, or the style. This work is strapped with a large vertical text across the left side, classic, which ascends from top to bottom. Here it is tilted in a different view to get a better look at it. The text itself was pulled from life. Vinyl on the front window of a mid-aughts Tacoma in the half-abandoned Menards parking lot. This both references a past nostalgic style of the automotive industry as well as a distortion or perversion of it through time. A reference to an inherited past, an idea removed from its origin or meaning. Classic. The primary elements within the work include ephemera and signage from printed advertisements from the bullish 1940s to the 1970s, the remnants of the ideas haunting the region with the rose-colored lens of history, both connected to the dethroned position and simultaneously to the illusion of his continued greatness. The images I'm using are torn from their original context, a familiar moment we are just unable to place. These distortions reflect the ways with which I understand the region's influences upon my internal psyche, somewhere between concrete history and tall-tale Midwestern lore. Throughout these compositions, there's always a counter to the flat function of the text and glossy nature of the background. These realistic elements are created with intensive and delicate care, implying a moment of calm introspection in their creation and the viewer's interaction with them. These simple, calm moments are often undermined by these repetitive, spinning, chaotic marks upon the surface. This herd of blurring colors reflects a dance within the work, a ritualistic meditation on the repetitive cycle of give and take from those before us to those after us. This spinning has really started to spread across all my work in prints as well as in paintings and has become a ritualistic piece of my practice. In reiterating this mark, I hope to find some new release or meaning, a fresh tire mark of charcoal black, warm and fleeting upon the asphalt. In this pigmented swing, I inevitably end up back where I started, only a fleeting trail of memory to mark the rotation. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it. And I have plenty of time for questions if anybody wants to ask. Hey, Luke.
Is there like a word here that you feel like is like the culmination of the vision you have there shown?
We talked about this in my defense. I think it's got to be, either Hoosier Heartbreak Highway, which is the center one here, or the El Dorado piece, which is Corktown Bricks. I'd say those two pieces are like the culmination of what I'm trying to say within the work, and they kind of have a little bit of everything, if it's up to me. But you can decide that for yourself. I think you'll all see different things within the work.
Do you think that you'll layer more? Are they done?
Yeah. I don't know. For now, I think if I hate them eventually, I'll probably pour some over and then start again. The beauty of enamel is it's kind of like invincible, so you can just throw it on top of anything and it'll stick pretty well if you just let it cure. So I don't know. I think maybe some of them will feel dated in time and need a second life, but a lot of them are at stages I'm pretty happy with.
What's the most number of layers you put in print?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I just stopped counting at some point because it gets kind of sad. Once you get to like, once you go over 20, I just stop counting. I'd probably like 23, 22 or 23. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between working in print media versus painting? Like I see a lot of similar imagery and layering, but is one more intuitive, one more freeing, one more restrictive?
I think that in time it's been that the work on paint has just been a lot more intuitive, a lot more improvisational, but that was more when I was working with planning my layers in print. And there's still a little bit more planned because you physically have to make the surface or the substrate or the matrix upon which you're printing. So you have to think through that line 2 or 3 times before it gets onto your actual prints. Whereas the painting, a line is a line. I'm sitting there in the studio, grab some charcoal and rub right into it. Yeah, they're both pretty highly improvisational, but I think the works in paint are naturally looser just because the limitations of the materials. Definitely. Yeah, I think when I kind of stepped away, I started to plan works, get a sketch done, and then, maybe halfway into that sketch kind of abandon it. And that the freedom of working, I also work on probably 3 to 5 pieces at any given time, so maybe 2 prints, 3 or 4 paintings. So it gives me a lot of time to let them breathe and step away from them and step back into them. So I think the freedom of being able to let some of the paintings fail. The beauty of making a lot of work is you can make bad work and it's not so much of a downfall. So I just make some bad work and then you can paint over it later. Making them not so precious, I think, is let me get the prints that way too. Yeah?
Which piece was the most fun to make and why?
I don't know. I really love printmaking, but like if you know printmaking, it's kind of printmaking is pain. So I don't know. As many of my students can tell you, I really like that El Dorado piece. That was just a blast to draw it. It's all just done with a brush pen to do those layers for the text itself. And the background washes of those stones are really fun to do. You're just throwing gum arabic at the stone, and that's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'd say either El Dorado or this piece right here because it was the first, which means it was like low pressure. I didn't know where it was going, and being surprised by your own work is always more rewarding than knowing where you're going. Sometimes it's like once you know where it's going, it's kind of like, well, do I really have to go do it now? Yeah.
So as being one of your students, I was not aware as coming into your class how time-consuming it is to make one piece alone. Can you give everybody like an outlook on how long it took you to make either one painting or this entire gallery?
Yeah, it took a lot of time. I don't really, I've kind of structured my life here at Purdue around just like kind of making work. So I just kind of structure everything I do. I just kind of live at the studio and live and breathe this, step in, step out. All of this work, except for like 1 or 2 pieces, is made within the last year. So I've made a lot of work, and a lot of it you're not seeing right now. The paintings can sometimes take sometimes they're really fast. Sometimes it's like 3 weeks and I do that whole painting. Sometimes it's 4 months because I step away in between. The prints themselves are really laborious because of the drawing elements and because the amount of time it takes to prep the materials. I'd say the prints, even though they're smaller and they're like more contained, they take like double the time that any printed composition takes. So 2 to 3 months probably is what it takes me to actually get the edition finished. The far right one, that's the like final proof, but I have not printed that edition. It's still on my to-do list after the show.
In the context of the planning versus improvisation, where do the 3-dimensional components of the panels fall that are made of like different materials?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So more often when I do the multi-panel compositions, what I'll do is I'll start with like a central canvas. For instance, in that one, it's the far left piece. And then I get to the edge of the canvas and it needs more over here, so I just kind of build something, attach it, paint onto that. Oh, I need more over here, put it in there, paint it in. Take them apart, add a piece in the middle. Adding the panels is pretty improvisational as well. I'll start with one place, almost like you start with a piece of paper and then you run out of space, so you got to tape more paper to it. I'm just doing that with substrates that I find around. Hey.
When it comes to the colors that you chose, like how did you decide that, and how early on in the process did you choose to just like stick with it?
Yeah. Well, they're meant to reference the like calm. Tan is meant to be like a neutral, internal, introspective color, where the reds and yellows and aggressive colors are meant to be informational colors from the industrial environments that I'm referencing. So I'm pulling from those, and then also, which I don't even think many of my students know this, but I'm red-green colorblind. So a lot of the work I'm creating at this like juicy color level that I see differently than you see, which is, I think, probably why I want to put so much red in, because I can't see it as well. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting little thing. But yeah, I don't know, I fell into it maybe. I was doing blue a lot when I came into school, and then I switched over to orange because I worked some blue into the orange, or some orange into the blue, and then I just went full orange. But I picked it a while ago, yeah, probably 2 years. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Reception at 5:30. We'll have some snacks. If you want to stick around, we'll turn on the lights. You can actually get a look at some stuff. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you. I teach here.
Yeah, I remember like, it was like,
Really good guy. Well, it's in the semester, so it's yeah. And then all the semester, it's like right away. Yeah. Shops upstairs. Oh. Yeah.